Let's start. Good afternoon, everybody, and good evening in Mae's case. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world, and we are particularly excited because this is Oceans Week. So leading up to Saturday's World Oceans Day, we are doing over 25 sessions with amazing ocean educators, scientists, and people from around the globe this week. And so thank you guys so much for being a part and celebrating ocean wildlife, ocean research, and understanding some of the threats facing our oceans as well. Right now, we've got 5 classes joining us from across North America. So I'm going to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out. We've got Miss Glasgow's grade 2s in Freehold, New Jersey. Hi, guys. Hi. We've got Miss Spears, grade 4 through 7s in Moberly Lake in BC. Hi, guys. There's like 5 of you, and you're like equally loud. I love the enthusiasm. Go Canada. We've got Miss Barajas, grade 6s in Oxnard in California. Hi, guys. Hi. We've got Mr. Hamilton's grade 3s in Troy, New York. Yeah. Welcome, and there's so many of you. And then last but not least, we've got Miss Curran's grade 4 through 8s in Georgetown, Ontario. Hi, guys. Hey. And we might get 2 more classes before we undertake or in the middle of the presentation. The reason you guys are all here is for our speakers. So we are joined live in Bristol in the United Kingdom by Mae Dorricott. So she is a marine biologist, an ocean explorer, a science communicator whose 2017 Rolex scholarship allowed her to travel the entire world in pursuit of amazing stories on the oceans, understanding the wildlife there, the threats facing them, and more. She's been with us several times before. We're always thrilled to have Mae back. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to her to share her story. Thanks so much for joining us, Mae, and take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for having me and joining us on Oceans Week. As you'll come to realize, I love the sea, so celebrating it is amazing for me. So I'm going to share my screen and get on with the presentation, so there's lots of time for you to ask me loads of questions. So I do this, now you can see Jesse again, and we're going to say goodbye to Jesse, and we're going to open up this presentation now. So my presentation is called Becoming a Storyteller of the Sea. And basically what I've always wanted to do is be in the ocean as much as possible, learn about it, and be able to share that with everyone else because I love it so much. And my journey began when I was really small. This is a picture of me in between my auntie and my uncle when I got to visit them in Malaysia. And as you can see, I'm a bit of an eager beaver. I love to just get in the water, snorkel around, and be in the sea as much as possible. And I remember asking my teacher when I was around 14 years old, I was like, Mr. Holsaw, is there a job where you can spend as much time in the sea as possible? And he said, yeah, Mae, that's a marine biologist. So from that point onwards, I always wanted to become a marine biologist. Fast forward a couple of years later, and I had graduated from Plymouth University with a first class degree in marine biology, and it was amazing. It was everything I wanted it to be, but I kind of was a bit worried that I'd never really had real world experience as a marine biologist. I already was a scuba diver, so I was like, how can I combine these two to really make my dream come true of exploring the oceans? I then stumbled across this thing, the Our World Underwater Scholarship Society, which is based in America, and it offers 3 individuals a year a scholarship where they sponsor you for a whole year to travel around the world, scuba diving wherever you wanted to go, and learn from people who you wanted to learn from. That could have been engineers or medical people. And in my case, I wanted to learn from other marine biologists and other ocean explorers. So I got to travel all around the world. I went to 17 different countries. I spent around 200 hours underwater. I got to learn different scuba diving techniques, from using a rebreather, which I'll come onto a little bit later, from diving really remote reefs, going to places which were really cold. And I got to dive with sharks all around the world, like great white sharks, and here is a bull shark. And I also got to do stuff like cave diving, going into places underneath our feet and being able to explore that watery realm. But like I said, I wanted to learn from marine biologists who have been doing this for a very long time. And I came across this lady here in this photo. Her name is Dr. Sonia Rowley, and she is an amazing marine biologist. And I was invited by her to this place called Micronesia, which is in the middle of the Pacific. It's kind of in between Hawaii and the Philippines, right in that big blue expanse. And there, what we were doing was using scuba diving to explore a zone that's really hardly explored. So from this graph, you can see the top reef, which most scuba divers explore with lots of fish and lots of life. But normal scuba can only take you down to around 50 meters, around 165 feet. And then people who like to go in submarines go really, really deep, down to 150 meters, 500 feet. But this middle zone here, what we call the Twilight Zone, is really unexplored. And by using a special scuba diving technique called rebreathers, we can go down to these depths and explore what lives here. And these are the things that really dominate these middle reefs, these twilight zones, and these are called gorgonians. And Sonia studies these, and every single dive, when she goes down all that way, she'll find new species on every single dive, new animals, totally novel to science, because no one ever goes down there. So it was really cool to be part of her expedition. And this is me diving around 30 meters, not too deep, but still quite deep, on one of these rebreathers. And you can see there's no bubbles, and it allows us to stay down for around 3 to 6 hours at a time underwater. And here I'm laying out a transect line to collect these things on the bottom of the screen called sponges, and trying to find out what animals live in and amongst these beautiful, beautiful reefs. And they were really remote and really beautiful. However, what we noticed was that the reefs weren't exactly that healthy. They'd been hit by something called coral bleaching, when the water temperatures get a little bit too high, a little bit too hot, and the corals don't like it. And if it lasts for too long, they eventually die. And as you can see here, this is a reef that has slowly died and slowly grown into just kind of rock. And what you can also see is that because there's no corals, there's no fish. And that's a bad thing. But when we talked to the people who we were living with out here in Micronesia, the people who were taking us out on the boats, they didn't realize that that's what their reefs looked like, because they couldn't scuba dive like we could underneath the water and really assess the situation. They were just wondering why there were no more fish to catch. But we could try to explain to them, this is what's happening. And this kind of made me realize how I like to share with people the science, not just do it ourselves and keep it amongst the scientific community, but share it with the people who it really matters to. So this led me to do some underwater photography, because I believe that if I could take a picture of what was going on underneath the water, all these amazing life, from bountiful reefs of fish to wrecks to squid, if I could show people what was underneath the water with a photo, maybe they'd be engaged enough to learn a little bit more about how these animals live their lives. And I've been able to capture some really cool things, especially some really tiny things. Now, I bet, well, I'm going to put this out there, that most of you won't know what this is or didn't even know it exists, but it's a flying snail called a pteropod, which lives in the big expanse of the water. In that empty blue, these guys thrive. And I loved capturing things like this and showing it to my friends and family and people who I get to speak to about all this wonderful life that lives in the sea. But what I could also take with photography were photos that weren't so good. And this was a photo that I took in Indonesia, in a place called Lembeh, of a little fish using this plastic bag, a little piece of a plastic bag, as shelter. And it wasn't the only place during my scholarship which I saw plastic. This was back in Micronesia with Sonia, and what had happened was that a turtle had washed up on a beach, and we dissected the turtle and cleaned out its stomach, and we found all of these plastic pieces in its stomach. This was when I went to Baja California, a place called La Paz, which is really famous for its whale sharks. But what they do, this is a really big fishing port as well, and they use big nets made out of plastic, and unfortunately they get abandoned and left out to sea. And what you can see here is a whale shark being pulled into the beach because unfortunately this whale shark was dead and it was floating around because it had been caught in one of these abandoned fishing nets, which doesn't degrade down. And unfortunately it drowned in that fishing net, and this is us trying to pick it up and take it away. But you don't have to go to all these fancy places to see plastic. This was from a beach clean in England. And we walked along the beach and we found all of this plastic. And what you'll notice is that this isn't stuff that you don't see. This is stuff that you see every single day. Sweet packets, forks, straws. I think there's even some Nerf gun pellets here. And the bottle tops and bottles and McDonald's cup, all of this stuff was found on a beach. And what we see is that 70% of the stuff we find on beach cleans are stuff that we use once and then throw it away. This is what we called single-use plastic. And there is no away when it comes to the oceans. We're all connected. And something that you may throw away, use once and throw away, will last forever. And it lasts so long that it gets broken down into smaller and smaller pieces and drifts around the ocean. And one of my final projects I got to do was join a team that does deep sea science. And what they did was they used an ROV, a little submarine, to go all the way down to 6,000 meters deep to explore a trench which no one had ever been to. And when they scooped up a bit of mud from the sea bottom, they sieved it through and found all of this plastic. At 6,000 meters, where no one had ever been to before, plastic had made its way there first. So this led me to, well, I finished my scholarship year around this time last year. And I wanted to complete my master's in science communication. But there was this big question looming over me of how did other people see plastic? I had been able to travel around the world and see plastic in all of these different places, but I wondered, how did others see it too? So I did a little bit of a scientific survey and looked at what had been happening in the media through a newspaper analysis. This is getting a little bit sciencey here. And what I noticed is that over time there had been peaks and troughs in how much plastic was mentioned in the media, in television, and in the newspaper. And there had been peaks when people really talked about it. And then once it kind of faded from people's minds, it kind of drifted and no one really did anything. And then Blue Planet 2 came out and everyone started talking about it again. And then I tried to ask people, how do you rank your knowledge of plastic pollution compared to other ocean issues? Because plastic pollution isn't the only thing affecting the oceans. We've got coral bleaching, like I said before. There's something called ocean acidification and overfishing and sea level rise. And people seem to rank their knowledge of plastic pollution much higher than all of the other things. And a lot of people said that they felt strongly about how plastic impacted the environment, 68.3%. And a lot of people, 86.4%, really felt that marine life was affected by plastic. But surprisingly, only 33.3% felt that they were worried about their own health when it came to plastic pollution. And then I kind of looked at if people did change their behavior in terms of single-use plastic or how they used plastic in their day-to-day lives, what caused them to change that? And some people said it was watching Blue Planet 2. And other people were like me, and they saw that when they'd been surfing and they saw it on beaches, that made them change their mind, or when they were scuba diving. And then other people said, like, when they saw a plastic straw stuck in a turtle's nose on Facebook, that really wanted to change their mind. But an also big one was that when people shared amongst their community with their friends and their families and shared their concerns of plastic pollution, that's what made them want to change their behavior. But an important thing that I came across when I was doing my master's was this quote here, that it's not enough for people to know about an issue in order to be engaged, but they also need to care about it and be motivated enough to be able to take action. And that's what I'm working on now, is not just kind of doing the science or talking about it, but making people really care about it and make them see that it's going to impact them. So one thing I'm doing is working with a charity called Plastic Pollution Awareness and Action Projects. And this is based in Bristol, here where I'm staying. And what we're doing is tackling the curry industry and takeaway pots, because how many takeaways are done every single day using these pots? So what we want to do is help engage people who utilize these to change their habits. And what we did was a couple of little brainstorming sessions with people from restaurants as well as charities to try and get that conversation going about how we can all collaborate together to make a change. But another big thing I'm doing is an online campaign with the Marine Diaries. And this is something that I'm doing with a couple of my friends. And we've got a Plastic Not Fantastic campaign going for this month, especially including in Oceans Week. And you can find us on Instagram at the Marine Diaries, or you can go online to themarinediaries.com. And if we've got time, this is our website. And I'm going to play you this really quick video to show you what we've got going on, if it works. Here we go.
So we can see it, but May, if there's audio, we can't hear it. Just to let you know. Here we go.
Join us, the Marine Diaries, next month as we walk you through the current state of the plastic problem. We explain how plastic is affecting every ocean creature, from microscopic plankton to the biggest animal on the planet, as well as the top apex predator, us. Covering the main offenders from our daily lives of food packaging, beauty and healthcare, and clothing, the Marine Diaries will be helping you every step of the way towards achieving a plastic-free lifestyle. From myth busting to product reviews and featuring organisations dedicated to tackling plastic pollution, stay tuned for Plastic Not Fantastic, brought to you by the Marine Diaries.
Wicked. So that's something that I'm working on at the moment with a couple of my friends, and we've got this blog going on which is going to mention lots of different things to do with plastic, and we've got other videos too which are going through how you can change things in your day-to-day lives to really combat this issue together with us. But my main job, after doing all of that, is I work in TV. And you might have heard at the beginning, I work at a place called Plimsoll Productions, and we're currently working on an ocean giant series. Now, I can't tell you too much because we're still filming. But what I mainly do is the thing that I've always wanted to do is tell stories of the ocean through film. And hopefully sprinkle a little bit of conservation in there too, but it's mostly an entertainment show. So this was when we were in Panama 2 weeks ago, filming some amazing things, but I can't tell you just yet. But it's going to be released on Animal Planet next year. So we'll see how that goes. So that's my main job at the moment. So that's everything from me. I hope I've given you a scope of the amazing range of life that lives in the ocean and the amazing things that scientists are doing and the places that you can see. But also mostly focusing on plastic pollution and that how, everyone can do their part to make a difference. So if you have any questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And anyone got any questions?
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much for that, May. And for our classes too, I'm going to pass along Marine Diaries website, Plimsoll Productions website, and the trailer for Blue Planet 2 because it's the best natural history documentary ever. And you guys should get inspired to watch that after this is done. Let's dive right in, and we'll start with Miss Flesko's class. If you guys have a question to kick us off, come on up.
John, go up by the camera. Say, yes, we do. Here,
Yeah, take your time, no hurry.
there you go. Go up where he can see you. The camera's right. Yeah, sit down in front of the camera. Okay, go ahead. Tell me your name.
Hi, I'm John.
Oh.
What was the deepest dive you ever been on?
Ooh, good question. So the deepest dive I've ever been on was to 50 meters. You might have to help me out with feet there, Jesse.
Yeah, so it's about 160 feet for the classes, the U.S. classes.
There we go. So 160 feet, pretty deep. And when you go down to that depth, if you're just on normal scuba, so just with a tank on your back, you can't stay down there for very long. So you've got to go down and then start coming up because the pressure is a little bit too much on your body. But if you use something like a rebreather, like that thing that I was talking about before when we were doing some science in Micronesia, you can stay down for longer, but then you have to slowly come up, and it might take a couple of hours to come up. So yeah, 60 meters was my deepest dive.
Very cool. So Miss Spear, you guys typed in some of these awesome questions, but I want to go to you guys. It's so much better if you can say them in person. So Miss Spear's class, you guys are next, and come on up.
Okay. Okay, we're ready.
Yep.
Go ahead and ask.
What's the worst disease that a coral reef can get?
Ooh, that was a really good question. So coral reefs are really hardy animals, and they can deal with like one illness at a time. But it's like us, you know, like if you've got a bit of a cold and then you go into school and then you've got loads of exams and then your teacher turns up the heating and it gets really hot and you start to sweat and there's all this stress on you, you can really get ill and kind of just want to like lay down and just give up on life. And that's kind of what's happening to coral reefs at the moment. So they've got heat to contend with, so that's getting really hot. So then what happens is that algae and bacteria, which normally are around the corals and they can cope with, if it gets too hot, they can't cope with all that bacteria anymore. So it kind of starts to grow around them and it kind of just overwhelms them slowly and suffocates them. And it's something called cyanobacteria. It's this red, fluffy, algae-looking thing. And it's a mix between a plant and bacteria. So it's called cyanobacteria. But there's loads of diseases that corals can get. They get stuff called white spot disease, black spot disease, red band disease. All this stuff can affect corals. But the big one at the moment is this suffocating of cyanobacteria.
So that was a delightfully creepy answer, and I love it. I have to ask, you actually said something really early on, and that is coral are animals. And so I know a lot of kids, in fact, a lot of adults, that's a confusing and odd concept. So please dive into that really briefly.
Yeah, so if you don't know, corals are animals. So they look like rock, and some people think they're plants, but they're not. They're all three: animal, plant, and rock. So you've basically got a colony, a group of small animals called polyps, which are like upside down jellyfish, and they live like this, and they kind of all clump together. And what they do is they sweat, if you like, out rock, calcium carbonate, which keeps them all cocooned. So it's like their skeleton being outside of them. And then adding on top of that, they have a tiny little algae called zooxanthellae, which lives inside of the upside down jellyfish, tiny thing, animal. And all of that together creates a coral reef. But the main component is that polyp, which is the animal. So that's, yeah.
For the classes, you may not know, these are the best hand gestures we've ever had during a Google Hangout session ever. So thank you so much to Mae for that. Also, we're getting a ton of typed in questions. I love it, guys. We are going to come to each class, I promise. And then at the end, with Mae's permission, we can share some more questions if there's more than we could possibly get to. But for now, we'll keep going through Ms. Barajas' class. If you guys have one, come on up.
What is your favorite dive and favorite animal?
No pressure.
Oh, favorite dive. That's a really good one. Okay. Off the top of my head, I've got loads, but my favorite dive was in Scotland. Yeah. Now, most people don't think that Scotland's good for diving, but I tell you, it was beautiful. It was like kelp forests with lots of seals that come in and play, and they were super curious, and they'll come right in and give you a bit of a nudge. And then when you came a little bit shallower, there were seabirds that were diving in from above. So it felt like I was flying with birds because there were birds swimming around me. And that was just really bizarre. I never had that before. So it would have been in Scotland. But my favorite animal is an octopus. Not being species specific here, but octopus in general, I love because they're super intelligent. They're just really curious. They've got such amazing abilities to camouflage, to solve puzzles. So I think they're really cool because they kind of change our idea of what we think of intelligent. So yeah, octopuses are my favorite animal, and Scotland was my favorite dive.
Super cool. All right. Mr. Hamilton's class, if you guys have one, come on.
All right, yeah, we have a few.
Everybody has one.
All right, go ahead, Jay.
Hi, my name is Jaylee, and how many times have you wanted to give up on being a marine biologist?
Oh, do you know what? That's like the deepest question I think I've ever had on this. Okay, heart to heart now, guys. I never went into marine biology for the money because I knew it's not really a well-funded discipline. It involves a lot of your time. But every time I thought, oh, what's the point of this? Maybe I'll just become a lawyer or an accountant or something that makes me lots of money. I had to think, what do I want to do every single day? Why do I want to wake up and commit to the world? Because we live in a crazy world. And I was like, well, what's going to make me happy every single day? And it's doing this. It's communicating about how amazing our planet is and why we need to save it. And that involves getting in there and understanding it more, because people are like, why should we save it? It seems to be okay. But the more we learn about how complex it is, how all these animals work together, it fuels me even more to want to carry this on. And at times I do question myself whether I'm doing the right thing, but I love it. And I've done some amazing things so far, so I can't be doing too wrong, can I really?
That is a great philosophy. Great question. I don't know if I've ever heard that question in 300 of these sessions ever. So way to go. All right, Miss Corinne's class, if you guys have one, come on up, and then we have a whole second round of questions we can do after this. Exciting stuff.
How much?
Go in front of the microphone.
How much of the ocean is covered with plastic?
Ooh. Okay. So this is a complicated question, a complicated answer to a very simple question, because a lot of people at the moment are asking, how much plastic is in the ocean? Why do we need to be thinking about this? Well, if you think about it, every single second, or I think it might be minute. Oh, we'll go with minute. We'll be a bit conservative here. Every minute, a garbage truck load of plastic enters the ocean. Every minute. Okay. So during my talk, that's a lot of plastic. It's hard though to say how much of it is covered, because the ocean is constantly moving with currents. But I can give you an idea of how far plastic has traveled. So like I said, in that deepest point of the ocean, plastic has already been found, which is crazy. These places where people haven't even got to, which are really physically a struggle for us to get to, plastic has made it there. And recently, they had found plastic fibers in the Alps, in the mountain ranges. So it's not even in the oceans anymore. And then, even more recently, they have found plastic in rain. So when it rains, they have found plastic particles. Because think of the water cycle. In the ocean, you've got loads of plastic floating around, and as the water evaporates, it goes into the clouds, and then where do the clouds go? It rains on the mountains. So it's kind of everywhere at the moment. But they say that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is this really famously known thing of this island of plastic floating around in the middle of the ocean, it's not exactly an island, but more of a soup. But in that soup, those kind of tiny animals, remember that kind of flying snail I showed you? Those are called zooplankton. And for every pound of zooplankton, there are 6 pounds of plastic in that gyre, in that ocean current in the middle of the Pacific. So 1 pound of naturally occurring organisms that should be there helping us in our ecosystem on this planet is outweighed by plastic by 6 times. So that's pretty crazy. So I'm not exactly answering your question, but it gives you an idea of how much plastic is out there. And that's constant. That's constantly being added every single minute. It's not stopped. The tap has not been closed. So that's something to consider.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive through a second round of questions, guys. And again, we are getting so many typed in. Don't worry, guys. We'll pass them on, and we can go to you guys directly. I also want to note, in case you don't get to it, just because, Mae, your story about scuba diving is so inspiring, and you got so many amazing images. Kids, so several of our classes today, you guys are 10 years old. 10 years old, you can go for a scuba license. So if you want to learn to scuba dive, really young, you can do that. I did mine a couple months ago. It's spectacular. Everybody should go right now. Leave this hangout to go learn to scuba dive. But if you are staying, let's do a second round of questions. We'll start with the first class. So we're back. Yeah, let's go to class. Come on up for a second one.
Oh, Sheridan, come on up. Sheridan. There you go.
I'm Sheridan. How many sea animals have you saved?
Ooh, Sheridan. How many? I can't actually think off the top of my head if I've physically saved an animal, grasped it from some plastic and torn it away. But something that I've been recently doing is something called ghost fishing net retrievals. So this is using scuba diving as a way to clean out the sea and basically go in there and collect fishing nets that have been left behind in the ocean. And sometimes in those nets, you'll find some animals which are trapped and you kind of remove them out. But I haven't really been keeping track of that, how many individual animals. So yeah, that's something that I do. But yeah, I haven't necessarily saved animals as such, but I hope in a bigger perspective, by talking to people and sharing things that I've seen, that in a way is saving animals.
It absolutely is. But great question and good attempt to answer that figured out. All right, Miss Spears' class, if you guys have a second one, come on up.
You go. Okay, they're ready. You go.
How many different coral reefs have you been to?
Okay, so I've been to Malaysia, which has a beautiful coral reef, and that's kind of linked to Indonesia and that side. So that's one. And then over in Mexico, there's a really long barrier reef, which is the second longest barrier reef to the Great Barrier Reef. Along that Mexico border. So I've been there. And then on the Pacific side, there's some coral reefs too, which I've been to. And I'll say that there's some coral reefs around England. They're not tropical, they're temperate corals, but they're still corals and they're still a reef. So I'd say around 4 or 5 coral reefs I've been to. The one that I haven't been to is the Great Barrier Reef. Yeah, gutted about that. But hopefully one day I'll get there before anything bad happens to it.
Yes, I have a feeling you will. But I like the attempt to get England into the coral reef. Well done. Not a struggle at all. All right, Miss Barajas' class, if you guys have a second question, come on up.
What animal is most affected by the plastic?
That's another really good one. So a poster child of plastic pollution are turtles. And I guess they were the first ones that we really started to notice were being impacted by plastic, because a plastic bag very much looks like a jellyfish, which is a turtle's primary food source. So they're heavily impacted. And it says around 90% of all turtles around the world have ingested plastic. But the next one from that is, rather than a creature that lives in the sea, is very much dependent on the sea, which are seabirds. And a lot of seabirds which eat food out at sea mistake the plastic for food. So seabirds are heavily impacted. But again, it's really hard to quantify, because there's some places, we haven't really even understood how our oceans work and how's everything interacting. But everything we've seen so far has been impacted from plastic. Again, in that recent kind of study, they found that the deep sea creatures that live at the bottom of the sea have been eating plastic too. We don't know how it affects them as such, but we'll see. But on like a totally different scale, going like really big, they've noticed that in like whales and dolphins, they might not necessarily be eating the plastic, but the animals that they've been eating have been eating plastic. And what's the really kind of ominous threat about plastic is the chemicals that kind of stick to them. So plastic's really sticky, and anything that's like toxic in the water kind of clings onto plastic. So when something eats it, those toxins then travel into the tissues of the animal. And then when it gets up to the scale of like an orca, a killer whale, that can be really toxic to that animal and really affect its like whole reproductive system. And a case study I kind of want to just kind of point out really quickly is in Scotland, there's a pod of orcas, killer whales, and they haven't been seen with a baby for 24 years. And a couple of years ago, their oldest female, called Lulu, was entangled in some fishing gear, washed up on shore, unfortunately died. But what they saw that her ovaries had never really bore a calf. She never had a baby, never been pregnant. And when they looked at her tissues, they were really, really toxic with all these chemicals which are associated with plastics. So this is the really scary thing for me about plastics, is this kind of unseen threat of how chemicals can be moved up the food chain via plastic. And again, we're at the top of the food chain. So that's something that we really have to consider when we talk about plastic pollution. It isn't just about things getting entangled and just eating the plastic and pooping it out. It's about this kind of weird kind of transition with the chemicals that we have to think about. So that might have been a bit too deep, but hopefully I've given you a bit of a broader scope of the issue of plastic.
Not at all. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. All right, Mr. Hamilton's guys, we're going to take 2 more questions, guys, and then we'll wrap up from there, because I know we're getting to the end of people's days. Mr. Hamilton's class, come on up.
Guys. All right, go ahead.
My name's Daniel.
And my name's David. And what is the percentage of animals killed or harmed a year by plastic waste?
Ooh.
Ooh, good question. So Daniel and David. Again, that's a really tough one because we don't really know. To kind of recap the scope of the plastic issue is that we have found plastic from the Antarctic to the Arctic. So from the poles, we've found plastic. We have found plastic from the surface of the water all the way down to the deepest trenches. It's kind of everywhere. And in that kind of scale, every kind of animal that lives within the oceans, we can kind of consider as affected by plastics. So don't just think about it as the turtles or the whales. Think about it as everything that lives in the ocean, even the things we haven't even discovered yet. Yes.
Excellent. All right, and we'll wrap up with one quick question from Miss Curran's class. If you guys want to come on up, go for it.
What's the biggest sea creature you've ever seen?
Biggest.
The biggest creature. Okay, I'm going to have my top 2. First one was a great white shark. It was around 4 meters long. What's that, around like 12, 13 feet?
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. That was in South Australia. And we were cage diving down at depth. And yeah, so that was really, really cool. But then even more recently, when I was out in Panama for this TV shoot, we had a pod of pilot whales.
Ooh.
And we got to swim with them. And they kind of hung around us for a very long time. And one of them, well, actually 6 swam underneath me in like a formation. And I couldn't see anything but whales because they were so long and so big. It was amazing. So pilot whales. And they're not even one of the biggest whales. There's bigger ones out there. But that was really cool. That was the biggest animal I've ever seen as a pilot whale.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much, Mae, for that. Actually, there's a few things I just want to cover before we wrap up. So you've mentioned plastic pollution as an issue a lot, and I'd really love to ask what the kids can do in these classes to contribute to solutions towards that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for concluding with that one, because we want to leave on a positive note. And everyone can do their part because you're all involved in the issue. Main thing, first easy steps is to cut out those single-use plastics I was telling you about. So start to identify stuff that is in your classroom or in your kitchen, the things that you use once and you throw away, and see what you can replace them with. So for instance, a plastic water bottle. If you find that you're buying a bottle of water every day, maybe consider buying a reusable one which you can keep forever and just keep on refilling. Then when you go to the shop, instead of buying stuff and putting it in a plastic bag at the counter, maybe take some bags with you, either ones that you've already got at home, or maybe think about getting like a tote bag, like a cloth bag. And then there's multiple of things that you can start to do, but try starting small with long-lasting changes before you try and commit to bigger things. But like I was saying, the Marine Diaries and our campaign this month, we're really starting to highlight things that you can do, which are a little bit more complicated, like maybe making your own face scrub instead of buying face scrub, or maybe making your own toothpaste. And these are things that you can maybe do in class, try out, test it, and see where you can go with it. It's a bit of an experiment, but it's lots of fun, and it's really hard to try and cut out plastic, but if you try and you share with your family and friends that you're doing this, we'll kind of spread the message all together. Like, how many of us are there here today? There's quite a few of us, isn't there?
100.
Yeah, there's 100 of us here today. And if everyone leaves here today being like, I'm going to stop using single-use plastic, and tell everyone around you that you're doing that, we'll make a really big impact together.
Outstanding. Mae, thank you so much for joining us yet again for all our classes. I know you guys had so many questions. If we had like 100 hours, we could cover all the questions you guys taken. But I will pass some of them along when we're done, and I'll pass along some of that information so you can find out more about Marine Diaries, Plimsoll Productions, and more. For now, though, boys and girls, I'm going to demute everyone's microphone. So if you guys could all join me in saying a huge thank you to Mae for joining us today. You're all demuted. Go for it. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us during your Oceans Week, our last session for today. We look forward to having you guys back really soon. And Mae, that was marvelous. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.